Hey everyone, Derek here, and I'm super excited that I get to talk to Dr. Richard Nongard today. Richard has written over 30 books, variety of topics, including leadership and personal development, and he's also helped people through his 12-week book community write hundreds of books. He's had hundreds of students, and with the help of that class, hundreds of new books have been published. I was one of those authors who have taken that class. I've been a part of that community for a couple years now. I joined like late 2021, started taking the class 2022. And for me, this idea was writing a book is hard. Writing a book is something I want to do, but it's going to take forever to get it done. Maybe someday I'll do it, but it's going to be a long journey. And after taking Richard's class, I realized that writing a book and sharing an idea and beginning to build your audience is actually much more attainable through consistent, focused effort. You can do it. I did it. A lot of people in his class did it. You can do it too. So I've invited Richard to talk about his insights and wisdom on writing, publishing, and creative living. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And most importantly, I hope it inspires you to write your book this year. Stop putting it off. It's attainable. You can do it. And I encourage you to enjoy this conversation and be inspired to write your book for your growing audience. Just to get us started, Richard, could you introduce yourself with how you started writing and how you got into publishing?
Well, I wrote my first book in 1994. I don't think it was that good of a book. It's long out of print. It's titled Evil Stands Alone. And the reason I wrote the book is because uh, Scott Peck had written a book titled The People of the Line. It was a New York Times bestseller after he wrote The Road Less Traveled. And I didn't think that was a very good book either. And his idea caused me to want to rebut it in some way. At the time, I was doing a lot of training for other mental health professionals. They were familiar with the people of the lie. And so I wrote a book that had a different answer, a different approach than Scott Peck's book. And I was pretty surprised. It sold pretty well. A lot of people bought the book, a lot of other mental health professionals, et cetera. And that encouraged me to then write my next book, which was, it's long out of print too, but it was titled The Perfect Victim Factor. And it looked at the coexisting combination of personality disorders that often cause clients and therapists just a tremendous amount of difficulty. That sold pretty well. So I guess it was really born out of wanting to share my big idea. And at the time, self-publishing, print on demand, Amazon, none of those things existed. And so I reached out to Melvin Powers, who had published some of the, best-selling personal development and psychology books. And he was in his 90s when I talked to him, and he said, Richard, your book sounds great. He said, I'm willing to publish it for you. He said, but he said, you're speaking to other groups. Do you think you can sell 1,000 copies of your book off a back table to people, in a year? I said, well, I probably could. He said, well, then you should publish it yourself because I'm going to give you $1 a book, and we'll print 3,000 to begin with. He said, so I can give you an advance of $3,000. He said, but if you think you can sell 1,000 books to your audience within a year, you get to keep. It's going to cost you $1 a piece to make the book. You're going to keep $9 a piece. You're going to make $9,000. And I said, well, how do you publish your own book? And back then, I had to actually. He taught me how to buy the paper, how to find an offset printer, how to find a different printer for the color, 4-color covers. He taught me how to find a book binder to bind the books and collate them and cut them. And he taught me how to get an ISBN number and get it in books and print so the bookstores could buy it. And I'm really grateful to Melvin Powers for that because he taught me something really important back then. And that was that when you do it independently, you have total control over the quality of the product. I see a lot of low quality books at bookstores, the editorial content, the sales and distribution, et cetera. Now, of course, we have print on demand. It makes 0 cents to share some of your money with the New York publishing companies. They actually don't care if your book is any good or not. What they care about is, Do you have a mailing list? Do you have a podcast? Do you have a social media presence? If you have a way to sell your book, they'll take your book and publish it through a New York Times publishing company. The difference is they're going to keep part of your money and require you to sell it to your customers. So I've been self-publishing since 1994 and been very, very successful with it.
Thank you, Richard. And at the Rolla Public Library, this was my introduction to Melvin Powers without actually knowing who it was or who the publisher was. But Melvin Powers is just a giant in the
Publishing.
self-help industry, and it's amazing that you're connected with him. Didn't even know that when I joined 12 Week Book, and when I realized you were connected with him and he helped mentor you, it was pretty amazing.
He was an incredibly helpful guy. He helped me learn how to title a book. His philosophy on the title is tell people what the book is about. So he had a book titled How to Win at Cards, right? How to win at poker, how to do self-hypnosis. He's just an incredibly helpful guy. And I would make calls to him throughout the process. And he answered those questions and passed away a few years after that, but I'd kept in touch with him and just a wonderful guy.
Now, you mentioned that he didn't overcomplicate the process. Titles were simple. He gave really valuable information in the books he published and that he wrote. Now, in your own online book community, you've helped a lot of people go from having lots of ideas to actually sharing useful ideas and information in a book, narrowing down their ideas and actually going into that process of here's a book that I wrote to an audience that cares about that message. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges for people when they have lots of ideas and they're trying to make that journey from person with lots of ideas to actual finished book?
Well, a lot of people think they have to put every idea in a book, and you only need to write about the idea that you want to write about. If there's more to write about, that becomes book number 2 or book number 3 or book number 4. So most people have the problem of they have a topic. It doesn't matter what the topic is, either a fiction or a nonfiction topic. It really doesn't matter. Even a children's book, people want to put too much stuff into this. My best-selling book is what I call an airplane book. I've written 400-page books, 6 by 9, 80,000 words. But the reality is, my best-selling book is, 21,000 words. It's an airplane book. It's 5 by 8. A person gets on a plane in Dallas. They get off a plane at, Newark. So they're probably on United flying from Houston. And a couple hours later, they've read a book. They have new ideas. And your book only needs enough to answer the thesis of the book. If there are more ideas, that becomes book number 2, 3, 4. And it's not uncommon for an author to write 4 or 5 books on one broad topic. And I do that as well. I've written several books on leadership, several books on self-hypnosis, several books on different approaches to counseling and psychotherapy. And even in a fiction book, trilogies sell real well. I have a fiction idea. Let me split up the story into 3 different stories. This is true with Star Wars. It was true with Star Trek. It's true with, romance novels, the trilogy of love, all these sorts of things. And so the problem most people have is trying to pack all their ideas into a book rather than a single big idea and sharing that with their audience.
Wow, that's a great insight. What would you say to somebody who's not sure about what their big idea is?
So one of the things that I always tell people, if you have ideas for multiple books or multiple big ideas, write the easiest book first.
Hmm.
That's the problem. It might not even be the book you're most interested in, or it might not be the book that you think is going to sell the most, but learning how to do it and actually finishing it and going through the process and the learning curve is a great thing for all of your future books. So I always tell people, write your easiest book first, the one you know the most about that you don't have to do a lot of research for, or write the one that's going to be shortest, or you can publish a 5,000 word book. There are books out there that are 5,000 words. I think most people want to hit 100 pages, which is probably 18 to 22,000 words. But again, there are lots of both novellas, short stories that are published in the fiction world, and even in the nonfiction world. One of the most influential books on me was titled The Little Big Book of Leadership. And I think it was 44 pages. It was probably a 6,000, 7,000 word book. And it had great ideas that helped me when I was doing my doctoral work.
And I know you've have you done, is it your two doctorates or three doctorates?
I have two doctorates. I have a doctorate in leadership and cross-cultural engagement and a doctor of psychology. But you don't have to have a doctorate to write a book. You just have to, you don't even need to be a good writer. All you have to do is share your ideas with passion on the pages, and we can get it edited. We can reorganize things. We can, fix writing errors, all those sorts of things, and make it good at the end. The most important thing is always just getting it done. There's no value in a great book that is never finished.
Hmm. Kind of leads me to my next point. What would you say you've read a lot and you have written a lot? What, in your opinion, is the difference between a good book and a bad book?
Uh, a good book lets the reader learn from storytelling. I have stories from my own experience in my nonfiction books that I share with my readers. I have stories from the many clients in therapy who I've worked with, and I change the facts, so I'm not revealing any client information. I fictionalize those stories in my nonfiction books so that my readers can identify with the characters in the story and see how they can apply those solutions. Or I've taken stories from the national media and the press and stories that people are familiar with either in culture or in politics or in current events and shared those stories that are public knowledge. In my book on viral leadership, I used several different very well-known CEOs as examples for how they approached leadership within their company. I shared those stories. One of those was Mary Barra, who is the CEO of General Motors. She started an entry-level position and became the CEO of GM. And and so I want readers to be able to see themselves and their solutions in the stories. Of course, if a person is writing fiction, um, what makes a fiction book great is sharing the emotion of the characters that are developed so that the reader can identify at the end of the book, that character was me.
Hmm.
And if a reader at the end of a fiction book says, I was in that book, then you've written an excellent book.
Hmm. You've studied a lot of best-selling books. Could you tell us about that process of you studying those books? And you've mentioned storytelling. What are some other themes or patterns you've seen with books that are best-selling books that make an impact on, on culture, or probably really even more importantly, on the audiences that it was intended to make an impact for?
Sure. Well, I think that a couple of different genres here. Nonfiction books generally follow a specific format. And that format, and what I did was I went to the bookstore and I said to the clerk, hey, I need $1,000 for the books that made it to the New York Times bestseller list. And they said, what? I said, look, help me find $1,000 for the books that new books, old books, it doesn't matter, did it make the New York Times bestseller list? So the clerk had fun. I don't know if they get commission or not, but they had fun going through the store and loading up a shopping cart. I don't think they ever had a shopping cart in a bookstore before. And we bought $1,000 for the books, and I brought them all home. I spent the next several months going through them. Some were religious books, New York Times inspirational books, political books, history books, all kinds of books that made the New York Times bestseller list. And then I went through them and I looked for common themes. Well, what did the first chapters have in common? What did the second chapters have in common? What do the third chapters have in common? What about the middle chapters? What about the penultimate chapter? That's the second to last chapter. What about the final chapter? And so what I did was I then created a set of prompts based on the most common attributes of New York Times bestselling books to help a new writer understand here's sort of a paragraph by paragraph. You can think of it as paint by numbers, right? So there's 17 paragraphs in that first chapter. And it starts with a story that illustrates a point, and the story only needs to be 2 or 3 paragraphs. It doesn't need to be a in-depth story. But we want to lead with a story about myself, about somebody else, about somebody well known. I want to come up with a thesis. Every book needs a thesis. Even a fiction book needs a thesis, right? And then I want to make promises to the reader. If they continue to read the book, these things will happen to them as they understand the thesis I'm writing about. Chapter two is almost always the things that stand in our way, the things that if I read a self-help book, I know how to help myself. I have a doctor of psychology degree, right? But sometimes I feel like I'm not living my best. it's usually me standing in my own way. So chapter 2 points out to the reader how they're often in their own way. And chapter 3 becomes the listicle, those things that are the solutions to the problem of chapter 2, the 7 most effective methods of self-hypnosis, or the 40 laws of power, or the I don't remember how many Stephen Covey had. I guess it was 7,
Seven.
right? 7 habits of highly effective people. The third chapter is that listicle and the explanation. Then each successive chapter becomes a chapter on each one of those things. The penultimate chapter, the second last chapter, is a collection of stories, either from my personal experience or others, of how these solutions helped. And then I call it chapter 12, but the last chapter of the book is the exhortation to the reader to then take action and apply these things in their own life and encourage them to do it. If you follow that format in a nonfiction book, a self-help type of book, it could be self-help doesn't have to be psychology. It could be, how to raise happy golden doodles, or how to groom your own dog, or, how to win at cards, any of these things. But that format, even for a memoir, people often want to write a memoir, but they mistake a biography for a memoir. Memoirs are far better than biographies unless you're, writing a history book, because a biography is chronological. It's I was born, I lived, and I died. A memoir is I have these experiences, and these are the 12 themes, and I'm writing about each of those themes, and it's not in chronological order. And it's much easier to write and can actually share a story of personal experience from an emotional perspective in, I think, a more powerful way.
Yeah, it's a lot of great insights in that. You mentioned fiction as well. You co-authored this book. I I think I remember you writing it in 2022, or you were working on it or thinking about it in 2022. The book, you wrote this with Dan Perez. What did you find to be a significant challenge when you wrote a fiction book versus the many nonfiction books you've written?
Sure, that book's actually my fourth fiction book. The first three I used a pen name. I don't encourage people to use a pen name, by the way.
Mhm.
But this is the first one that doesn't have a pen name. And uh, uh, the challenge for me is I've never viewed myself as a particularly gifted or talented writer. And a fiction book needs to be a book that tells a story in a certain way with certain language. And that's why I brought Dan on board to help me with the project. I had the idea for the story and all that. And I think I'm a pretty good writer at sort of the facts, but I'm a professor. And so I write like a professor. And, and so I brought Dan on board to help me. He's an expert in fiction, to um, sort of dress up my language and all those sorts of things. But you don't have to have a friend like Dan to help you with a project. Let's say you're not necessarily a gifted and talented writer, like I don't perceive myself. Um, Once we get it done, even if it's not that interesting, now we can go back and we can edit it. We can edit it ourselves. We can get feedback from beta readers. We can hire an editor. We can do all these things. But once it's done, even if it's not very good, now we can go revise it in the revision process, and we can make it excellent. And that's an important thing. But writing a fiction book, I really enjoyed it because I write so many nonfiction books that I just got to be creative, and I got to be goofy, and I got to do things that are impossible to do. At least my characters did, um, because in a nonfiction book, well, we kind of have to stick to reality.
Hmm. Oh, that's a lot of fun, and yes, this is a really cool book, like a crime thriller type book, and I think that also speaks to the fact too that a lot of times people are scared to try something new in the writing world. When you have the mindset that you can write as many books as you want, like Richard has, you don't have to cram everything and make it like one great American novel. You can actually try a lot of things out and have fun with it. And I think that's a really good insight.
That's been the
For
great thing in class. A lot of people came in writing in their area of expertise. Jane Wessler came in writing about legal issues and children. She's a lawyer and a social worker, right? And Rusty Williams came into our class and wrote about his experiences as a police chaplain, and also a dog handler, and taking care of dogs and those sorts of things, right? And then they went on to say, well, let me try my hand in fiction, writing a fiction book. And, many members of our group have gone on after writing a few nonfiction books in their expertise to let their creative wild out. And, and it's always great to see that, because, um, when we use our creativity in new ways, well, it helps us to. I've always said if you think you need therapy, write a book because it's the best therapy there is.
That's a really cool idea. I want to ask you real fast, how much do you write a day? How much do you suggest writers write a day if they're interested in writing a book? I know you help people write their book in 12 weeks. What's the time commitment involved for writing a book?
What's most important is to write a little bit each day. That helps a person just stay on schedule. I generally write every single day. My pattern is I get up, I check my email, I do some other messaging, I walk my dogs. When I walk my dogs, I come up with some big ideas. I come back and usually I'll spend, sometimes just 40 minutes. There's plenty of time to write 200, 300 words on a project I'm working on. You do that enough days in a row, you have a book. And then some days I might get excited about my idea and spend 8 hours at my computer and write 4,000 words. That's fine also. But the reality is, spending a little bit of time in unfortunately, a book won't write itself. Even with AI, it won't write itself, and you shouldn't write an AI book. Okay, AI can be a helpful tool, but you don't want AI to write the book for you. So you have to write the book. And people say, I don't have time to write a book. It doesn't take much time. You get up 30 minutes earlier, stay up 30 minutes later, take a shorter lunch hour, do something on your break that, instead you were watching TV or scrolling TikTok, and pretty soon you'll have a book. And a book doesn't need to be fat in order to be good. It just needs to be good in order to be good.
Yeah. I know
Actually, it
from
doesn't even need to be good. It just needs to be finished to be good.
getting it done is getting it perfect. I remember that's
Right.
a thesis statement you state a lot. I know for me, a challenge has been that idea of, well, where's the time? And I've realized that you kind of have to make the time. And so, for example, I've been waking up an hour earlier and working in the morning, and then I'll work some on the weekends as well. So it really is a process of not waiting for the time to be there and more like making the time, even if you're a busy person.
And, people say, I don't like to get up early. If you have an idea you're excited about, you want to wake up early. You
Yeah.
can't stop it. So I've been getting up at 6 a.m. lately. Um, Even though I've been going to bed at the same time, full of energy because I have a project that I'm working on now. I have a new book coming out titled Experiential Approaches to Somatic Therapy. I'm in the final stages. It'll be out sometime in the next month. And so I've been, you know, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and sitting at the computer for an hour, and it'll be done on time.
Over the decades, the publishing industry has changed a lot. What do you see as the biggest opportunities for writers in 2025?
Well, the biggest opportunity is with self-publishing and content creation. The reality is, in 2025, there's no reason other than vanity, to have a New York publishing company help you. I mean, Amazon literally is a monopoly. It is the publisher, the advertiser, the ebook distributor, the printer, the sales vehicle. The Amazon bestseller list is more important than the New York Times bestseller list at this point in life. And the reality is that presents a tremendous opportunity. It means that without wasting a year of your life for a publisher to take action, you can do it in 12 weeks. You can start with your big idea, you can outline it, you can get your book written, you can get it edited, you can get a beautiful cover made, you can have it distributed in 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 24 weeks. That process is and you get to keep all the money. Um, the biggest downfalls, people say, well, this is too much work. I don't know how to do it. Well, I teach people how to do it. The biggest pitfall is people are like, well, I'm going to get a publishing company to help me. They only want $5,000 or $10,000. That's called a vanity press. It's always a scam. It's always a ripoff. You can do it yourself for a couple $100, and the process is not easy. We've had young people do it in our class. We've had very, very old, 93-year-old guy in our class who just self-published his book. It's on the Amazon list. His first book. And so there's just a ton of opportunity there. And the other thing is we have the ability, if there's a topic that I'm really, truly interested in, to then create related content in social media that can generate sales for my book. whether that's in podcasting or short form video like TikTok, or long form video like YouTube, or social media groups. Jane Wessler with her book on bone density. She said, I want to start a Facebook group, and I showed her how to do it. And I thought, how many people are going to get in a bone density group, right? Osteoporosis and osteopenia, how to increase your bone density, right? I thought she'd get 100 people in her group. 2 years later, she's got 10,000 people in her group and selling her books left and right, and has become an authority on the subject. And social media gives us that opportunity that we would never get with a traditional publishing house in the past.
As we wrap up today, Richard, could you tell us a bit about how you came to start 12weekbook.com? And then how do people join if they're interested in writing their book in 2025?
Well, the way to join is to go to 12weekbook.com. So that's the way to join. 12weekbook.com, the date, the info, sign up, it's all there. It's not too much money either. It's pretty cheap. It's like $400 or $395. And I'll teach you everything you need to know. About 40 different tutorials, handouts, step-by-step checklists, the chapter template generators, all those sorts of things. So 12weekbook.com is how you join. How did I get started with the course? I had actually done a previous version of this course for my therapists who often want to write, self-help books or textbooks. It was an asynchronous course I had made. I don't know what it was, 6 or 8 videos that guided people through the process. And so people took that and found it was helpful. When COVID hit in 2020 and the governor shut down my office and everyone else's business, I did what everyone else did. I got a bunch of carbs and started cooking at home because the restaurants were closed, and got fat and watched the news to see what the heck was happening over the next 2 weeks. And I had this idea in my mind for a book. It's actually a book that I had an idea for 20 years ago, but I thought, well, now would be a good time to write it. But after a few days, I hadn't written one word. I had no motivation. Like a lot of other people, I was just sitting around the house watching news and eating food. And so I thought, I'll send an email out to my list to say, write a book with Richard. Join me on Sunday nights or whatever night it was then. And I'm going to write my book. And as I write my book, I'll show you how to write your book. And I figured I'd have like 10 or 12 people sign up for it. And I sent the email out to my list. I had 100 people register in the first 3 days. And I said, wow, this is, I never taught a Zoom class with 100 people before. And the class was packed. And I started writing my book, held me accountable. And I was showing my class what I was doing as I was getting covers made, getting my book edited, writing content, all those sorts of things. And a ton of people in the course finished their book. And I ordered their books, and I held their books up. This is one of our authors from our class, right? I held their books up. And so it was so successful, I scheduled another class. Another 100 people signed up. Now, 4 years later, we've had almost 1,000 people take the course. We've had hundreds and hundreds of books finished in the course. And if you think about it, the assignment for the course is write a book. But we've had hundreds of people complete the assignment. And even some of those who haven't finished the assignment eventually will finish the assignment because they've made it real. And so that's how the course came about. And I think there's no end to it. It'll continue on forever because I'm having a lot of fun. There's nothing I like more than hearing the doorbell ring and the dogs go crazy, because they go crazy when the doorbell rings. And I know it's Amazon dropping off more books from people who have finished books. And I mentioned Amazon a couple of times. Here's the cool thing. I teach people how to not only get it on Amazon, but how to publish a book in such a way that's available at any bookstore in the world. So one of my favorite things to do is to walk into random bookstores and say, do you have a book by Richard Nongard on leadership or whatever the subject is? And they'll look it up and they'll say, okay, would you like us to order it for you? Not right now, I'll let you know, but it's nice to know all of my books are available from any bookstore worldwide.
Yeah. Richard, thank you so much for being here today and for having this conversation with your insights, working with so many people, your own insights from your own projects, and then helping so many people do this. And it's really I'm a part of your group, so just being in that group, I can see how much fun you have with it.
You
And
finished a lot of books. How many books have you finished in the course? You finished three or
I have
four?
finished three. Yes, I have. In fact, have them right here. I finished the three books, and I remember this was my first one, and I've considered myself a writer forever, really. And the idea of a book was like that unattainable thing, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm a writer, but the book thing is probably unattainable. I took your class. I think I actually signed up for it on a Thanksgiving. I was feeling good. I ate Thanksgiving dinner. I was scrolling through Facebook and we were already connected on Facebook and I saw write your book in 12 weeks. And I'm like, this is interesting. And you have this stack of books right on your picture and I go click on the link and I'm like, okay, this is an affordable program. I should just take this. And if you think about right, I mean, we spent all this money on books, and sometimes the books make it seem like it's even harder. And so this was like, okay, this is an affordable thing. I can do this. And I got into it, and then I started looking at what you call the chapter generators, or the basically, the paint by numbers, write your book, share your message. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like so much fun. And so I was most passionate about podcasting at that time because I was experimenting with a lot of projects. And I was like, okay, I'm always thinking about this. This is what I'm going to write my book about. So I came up with my thesis statement and I thought about my experiences and I thought about the experiences of other people. And this book happened. And then I wrote Stress Free Student after that, and stress free student was my own experience with productivity. I have like it's sometimes there's like just so many ideas and it's hard to actually get things done, so this is kind of my experience with that. And then after that, a lot of people from the Royal Public Library will recognize this is Mr. Derek. I Around 2023 I knew I'd be moving on from the library soon, just because life is what it is and you grow into new positions. So I wanted to commemorate that time. And I actually had a lot of kids because sometimes I'd work down on the children's side and I did story times, and kids would draw me these pictures and then they would just leave them for me, right? And I thought to myself, I remember this one little girl and she drew a blue fish and she said, "This is Jessica the mom fish. Here's this. Please never throw this picture away." And so I had this file of pictures, and then I had the kiddos. So I eventually reached out to her and a bunch of others, or I reached out to their parents actually, and then they gave permission. And then we had Missing Library book illustrated by 34 patrons of the Royal Public Library. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun with it, and I just see how much fun other people have with this class. And I mean, there are books in that class where it's just so diverse. Like the perspectives are diverse. It's not just people in the United States taking this class, it's people around the world. There are people who are English wasn't their first language who are taking this class and they're writing their book and they're going through the process. And it's really amazing just to see this diverse group of people in your class who have written their books. And I think that's a real testament to your insights and the wisdom that you've shared, because people really are getting it done and sharing their books. Hey there, did you like the video? If so, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below, hit the bell for all notifications, like the video, share it with your friends, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you very much.